So Eric, welcome to Coffee with a Googler. Tell us all about yourself.
Yeah, so I've been at Google for, like a decade now.
Wow.
Mostly working on the web.
Okay.
Until about 3 years ago when I helped start the Flutter project.
Okay.
Which is now what I work on. And I've been writing code most of that time, although a couple years into Flutter I switched from coding all day to now I lead the engineering team.
So what's it like changing from coding all day to being an engineering manager? Remembering that our audience are primarily developers, so...
It's been a wild ride, mostly because Flutter's just been exploding. Usage inside and now outside Google. And that's been fun. And it's fun to just, help people get stuff done.
Right. Now, you've had a background in a lot of web, and particularly in rendering, right? And how's that helped you with building Flutter?
Yeah, so I've worked on rendering systems for, 10, 15 years now, again, mostly on the web. And that's sort of how we ended up starting Flutter, is that we, I feel like that's where my leverage is.
I like that expression, where my leverage is. I have to remember that one.
Yeah, we just, wanted to do something better for mobile.
How did Flutter start?
Well, that's a bit of a story.
My favorite kind.
So I used to work on Chrome.
Okay.
And I was on the Chrome team at the time. And we were working with some hard problems, trying to get certain parts of the web to really, be nice and smooth.
Right.
And for whatever reason, we did this experiment for a couple weeks.
Okay.
Where we decided it was going to be okay to break compatibility with the web.
Okay.
And with
Thankfully, it was only an experiment.
Oh, just an experiment.
Yeah.
But with that restriction removed, we just started removing things. All these old compatibility supports for all these obscure websites that,
Right.
the vast majority of us never go to.
Yeah. Or maybe they don't even exist anymore. Right?
Yeah.
Because it evolves rapidly. So.
And we just kept removing and removing and removing. And at the end of a couple weeks, we ran our benchmarks again. And obviously, this wasn't quite the web anymore, right? It couldn't render all the web. But it was 20 times faster.
Wow.
On some of the benchmarks we cared about.
Okay.
And we're like, there's something here.
Right.
And so we kept digging. And from that we started, and probably took us about another year of digging before we realized we just need to write a whole new thing.
So it's like, now, tell me what Flutter is. What is it all about? There's a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions, and I know I've had many of them. So, assume I know nothing, which is a pretty safe assumption. So, tell me about Flutter. What is it?
Yeah, so Flutter is a way to write for iOS and Android
from
a single code base.
Okay.
And we try to make that fast and easy. And we make a bunch of choices in that space to try and do some awesome things there.
Right.
For example, Flutter's a full stack. We talk all the way down to the GPU and CPU, talk straight to the hardware. We made a bunch of choices early on around making custom very easy. So we have a very layered approach. You can take as little or as much as you want. And then finally, the third thing, we have a bunch of investment in tooling.
Okay.
So that's part of how we make development fast. We have things like a developer cycle that's less than a second from
Tell
when
me
you
about
save.
that. Less than a second from... So when I save my code to actually running it?
Yeah, like running on the device.
Okay. How does that work?
Well, so obviously we have to use the iOS and Android tools to get the code onto the device in the first place. But once it's there, then you just edit your code and you hit save. And we have this thing called hot reload, where we inject the new code into the running Flutter system.
Okay.
And it just updates. You don't restart your app. You don't change your place in the app. Code just changes.
Nice. I mean, I've been a mobile developer for a while, so building on various mobile platforms, and it's always like compile, deploy, wait for it to boot up, wait for it to execute, wait for the debugger to start, only to find out I left out a semicolon or something like that, right? So, and that can be minutes in some cases, right, with some images. So by cutting that to a second, what kind of things are you seeing the impact that has on
it's
developers?
just totally changed the way we see people develop inside Google. Those who use Flutter. Some teams we've seen just literally sit with their designers, and they talk about painting their app to life.
Okay.
We had, one of our founding
I
principles.
see Bob Ross as you say that. So.
Totally, lots of little trees. But you watch these teams, and they just constantly hot reload, hot reload, hot reload, hot reload, and their app just comes to life.
Wow. So now that kind of iteration is made possible by the fact that you have Dart as the programming language. Is that right?
That's right. We do use a programming language that hasn't seen a lot of usage outside Google yet, but actually gets quite a bit of usage inside Google. and that's called Dart. And we're the first mobile adaptation of Dart. And Dart gives us things like this hot reload.
Now, one of the confusions that I often hear, that particularly when we say, hey, we have a platform for building for multiple devices, is that it's a thin veneer over a web platform. But Flutter is something very different, right?
Not at all, that's right. Yeah, so Flutter, again, we go straight to the metal.
Okay.
We have a custom runtime that we built from the ground up. And we use some sort of best-in-breed technologies from the rest of Google, like we use Skia, which is this rendering technology that's used in Chrome and Android and a few other places. And we use the text rendering system, or parts of the text rendering system from Android.
Okay.
And then we also use, of course, Dart, this Dart runtime.
So what does like a Flutter application look like? I assume I'm not compiling a .app or a .apk. And so what will it look like if I'm going to iOS or going to Android?
So actually you are.
Really?
So a Flutter application is just an iOS app or just an Android app.
Okay.
Flutter provides actually a Flutter view, and most people use those full screen. And then we paint every single pixel you see on the screen. But you can use Flutter view just alongside all the rest of your Android views or your iOS views. So yeah, you retain full control, and you can write as much Java or as much Kotlin,
Okay.
or as much Swift or as much Objective-C in the rest of your application, and then share as much as you want between
Nice.
with Flutter.
So even if I have an existing app, I can start then improving that using Flutter?
That's
so
right.
it doesn't have to be a...
You don't have to
just new
start
apps only.
greenfield.
Nice. And one of the things I noticed when I was like browsing the Flutter website is that there's a whole bunch of controls as well, right? So that these look, and I was wondering if that leads to maybe some of the web confusion, because they're very web-like controls that you can have as add-ons to Flutter.
So some of that comes from the inspiration from the web. So a lot of my team started on the web. I used to work on the web for many years. Our current tech lead, for example, wrote the HTML5 spec.
Your tech lead wrote the HTML.
Yeah.
What? Okay, so
There's some deep roots in the web.
definitely.
But yeah, so we do share some of the same nouns and verbs, as the web does. Like we have something called Flexbox. And so it should feel very familiar to people coming from the web, but it is not the web. The technology core is not the web.
So it really feels like a best of both.
We hope so.
Yeah, that's good. So say I'm a developer and I'm either a mobile web developer building native apps in iOS, Objective-C, Swift, or in Android and Java, Kotlin, or maybe I'm a mobile web developer. What advice would you give me on how to get started and how to get productive really quickly with Flutter?
Sure. So obviously all of our docs start at flutter.io. That's our domain. But there's also a ton of YouTube content out there.
Okay.
People doing tutorials.
One of the other things was I know you've just released a beta.
That's right. Just this last week, we announced beta at Mobile World Congress. We're now starting to ship regular betas that we've vetted further, so they're nice and stable for your usage.
Cool. And even though you've been in alpha and just gone into beta, I know lots of people have been using Flutter and lots of apps have been built with Flutter. Do you have any particular favorites?
So the biggest name that folks know is that the Hamilton musical, that app was written in Flutter last year.
I'm a total fan of that musical. I'm going to start singing it in a moment now that you've mentioned it. The song's going around my head. So.
And Google has released a few apps, and there's a few more on the way. And the community, again, is just starting to explode. We've seen hundreds of apps already launched to the Play Store, and again, lots more in progress.
Right. Now, I know you've had some really fun scenarios of things that people have done with Flutter, right? I'd heard of some designers taking a look at award-winning designs and then redoing them? Or
So I know the story you're talking about, but yeah, one of the fun things that we see with Flutter is that we have as a founding principle that you should never have to say no to your designer.
Right.
You should be able to do anything the phone can do, anything your designer might want to envision. And so we see people testing this, and they go to these design websites,
Right.
and they find, the winning design of that day or the winning design of that month, and they're like, can I do that in Flutter? And most of these designs have never been done before, never been implemented for iOS, never been implemented for Android, and they do it in Flutter. And one person in particular in Spain, Sergi of Sergi and Replace.
Not our Sergi?
Not our Sergi. Did like a tutorial series where he took one of these and he built it up. And it's just neat to see people doing that kind of thing.
Wow, cool. So again, if I want to get started, it's flutter.io.
That's right.
And the beta is now available. So if I'm a developer who's played with Flutter before and maybe it wasn't for me because it was in an alpha, that'd be good to try the beta.
That's right.
Okay, so flutter.io, download the tools and get started. Cool. So, well, thank you, Eric. That's been a lot of fun. And thanks everybody for watching this episode of Coffee with a Googler. If you have any questions for me or if you have any questions for Eric, and if you want to know more about Flutter, please just leave them in the comments below. Thank you so much.